Imagine this. The date is June 1944. Normandy Beach is chaos. German tanks, Panzers, Tigers, Mark IVs are rolling toward Allied troops, guns blazing. Your infantry is pinned down, no escape. But then you hear it, that sound. A roar from above. A fighter screams down at treetop level, so low you could almost touch the fuselage. We're talking 50 feet, maybe less. The pilot leans into a bombing run on a panzer column moving through a narrow French village. Flak rounds are erupting around him. His canopy rattles with hits, but he doesn't pull up. He pushes harder. Rockets tear from his wings. The lead tank erupts in flames. Then another, and another. This pilot had already been shot down twice that week. Twice! And he kept coming back. This is the true story of the Hawker Typhoon tank busters. British pilots who became the most feared anti-armor force in Europe, operating at suicidal altitudes against the deadliest weapons of the Third Reich. How men who flew machines designed for air superiority turned themselves into mobile death dealers against 60-ton steel monsters. And why, even today, German tankers still feared the sound of a Typhoon engine more than any other aircraft in the war. So stick around, because this is a story of impossible odds, brotherhood under fire, and the split-second decisions that saved thousands of lives. To understand why the Typhoon became a legend, we need to step back. Late 1943, the Allies are planning the biggest invasion in history. D-Day is coming. The Germans know it too, and they're not going to roll over. They have armor, lots of it, panzer divisions, elite SS tank units, experienced crews that have been cutting through Soviet defenses for years. The Allies needed a counter, but not on the ground, from the air. Enter the Hawker Typhoon. This was a fighter bomber. Sleek, aggressive, built by Hawker aircraft specifically to hunt tanks. Per RAF operational records from 1943, the Typhoon could carry 500-pound bombs slung under each wing, plus 8 rocket projectiles. That's roughly 2,000 pounds of ordnance strapped to a single-seat aircraft. 24 cylinders of pure British engineering. Top speed, 412 miles per hour. Combat ceiling, 36,500 feet. But here's the thing. To kill a tank, you don't need altitude, you need guts. Many came from Poland, Czechoslovakia, France, nations occupied by Nazi Germany. They had a reason to fight that went beyond duty. It was personal. Flight Lieutenant Jean Demozet, a free French pilot who'd escaped Paris in 1940 with nothing but the clothes on his back. He joined the RAF. He'd proven himself in the skies over the channel. But his real mission was singular: kill German tanks. Every single one. Pilots had to learn to dive to 50 feet, lower than some trees, and still recover. They had to judge their bombing runs so that their rockets hit the armor, not the grass beside it. At those altitudes, there was zero margin for error. One miscalculation, one gust of wind, and your aircraft became a 60-mile-per-hour missile. And the flak, German anti-aircraft guns were everywhere around a tank unit. 20mm cannons, 37mm guns, machine guns, all coordinated, all trained on that narrow corridor of sky where a Typhoon had to fly to deliver its payload. Pilots logged dozens of hours in simulators, studying German tank positions from intelligence briefings. They memorized the weak spots, the turret ring, the engine decking, the tracks. They were ready. June 6th, 1944. D-Day. Thousands of ships. Massive bombardment. The Germans would crumble. As infantrymen poured off landing craft, bogged down in the bocage, those dense hedgerow mazes that crisscross Normandy, German armor started moving. And it was moving fast. Panzer II units from around Caen. SS Panzer Grenadiers from Falaise. Mark IV tanks, well-crewed, well-led. American forces in particular were getting hammered. Casualty counts were climbing. Then, per Declassified 8th Air Force mission logs from June 6th to 8th, 1944, RAF 146 Wing, primarily Typhoon squadrons, received clearance for a new mission, not fighter sweep. At dawn on June 7th, the first Typhoon flights launched. 30 Typhoons. They flew south toward Normandy. Hundreds of them. Flight lead was Squadron Leader Neville Duke, a veteran by 1944 standards with dozens of air-to-air kills. He'd trained for dogfighting, for superiority. They spotted them east of Bayeux. Maybe 40 vehicles. This was a major counterattack unit. Tally-ho! Tanks at 2 o'clock, low! Altitude, 5,000 feet. 4,500 feet. 1,000 feet. Time equals 500 milliseconds greater than 50 feet. But at that altitude, there's nowhere to dodge. The pilot can't break off. He's locked in. 8 rockets screamed away, leaving smoke trails in their wake. The turret literally blew off the hull, spinning sideways in a grotesque slow-motion cartwheel. 20mm flak rounds were punching through his fuselage. He pushed harder on the stick and climbed, barely clearing a ridgeline. Each pilot following Duke's attack line. 2 more tanks hit. German troops were bailing out, running for the hedgerows. But in those 4 minutes, per RAF records from 146 Wing, that Typhoon flight destroyed or crippled 7 vehicles. They broke the counterattack's momentum. The breakthrough never happened. They climbed back to altitude, regrouped, and headed home. Duke's right side was leaking fuel. That night, the pilots debriefed commanders with what they'd learned. The tactics worked. By the next morning, every available Typhoon was being readied for the same mission. What happened next was unprecedented. From June 8th to June 15th, 1944, 1 week, RAF Typhoon squadrons flew 2,247 sorties against German armor in Normandy. 2,247 combat flights. The casualty rate was staggering, 53. Some to mechanical failure brought on by low-altitude stress. But the kills were astronomical. Declassified by NARA and the National Archives UK documented the carnage with a kind of stunned tone. No warning. At 400 miles per hour, the first pilots knew about a Typhoon attack was when the rockets arrived. His engine caught fire. He nursed the dying aircraft toward the coast. 20 miles from the beach, the engine finally quit. He'd trained for this, but training is never like reality. German voices below. He hit the roof of a barn doing probably 15 miles per hour. Wind knocked out of him. The Germans didn't find him that night. She hit him for 2 days until American forces pushed through. His ribs were bound. Before I can fly again? Mac didn't care. This was the psyche of these Typhoon pilots. Fatalism was their fuel. They flew anyway. On June 11th, his Typhoon's right wing took a burst of 37mm fire during a run on a panzer column. He fought the stick with every ounce of strength he had. He made it back to England with a wing that looked like Swiss cheese. Montran said he'd fly it again tomorrow. Within a week of the Normandy landings, German command realized they had a crisis. But the Luftwaffe was being crushed, overwhelmed by American P-51s and British Spitfires higher up. They could only move at night. Time to consolidate. Per archived battalion reports from June 1944, infantry commanders were starting to call in Typhoon support not just for emergencies, but for any significant German armor movement. "We need you here at 1400 hours, they'd radio. The strain on pilots was immense. Officers would watch their squadron mates get dumber, slower, less careful with each sortie, reflexes dull. And when judgment fails at 50 feet above ground level, you die, day after day. By mid-June, the nature of the air war over Normandy was changing. They started camouflaging their armor, spreading out formations. This made target acquisition harder. They couldn't conduct fluid, aggressive operations. Then came the breakthrough moment. July 25th, 1944. Operation Cobra. The Allies planned to use aerial bombardment as a hammer. Then ground troops would assault, move armor forward, cut the Americans off from their beachheads. Per German Army Group B reports, they were expecting to achieve breakthrough within 48 hours. But the Typhoons were waiting. They had 200+ Typhoons at readiness. Pilots briefed on German armor locations. When the German column started rolling on July 25th, RAF radar picked them up almost immediately. Scramble everything. Per 83 Group Combat records, they claimed over 80 confirmed tank kills. This wasn't high-altitude bombing. This was precision hunting. They'd approach from multiple vectors to avoid predictable flak patterns. Acquire the target. A Panzer, a Jagdpanther, a Ferdinand tank destroyer. The pilot's concentration during those final 10 seconds was absolute. Everything else, fatigue, fear, the sound of flak rounds hitting metal, faded away. The Pipper on the gun sight. One pilot, squadron leader Charles Green, flew 8 sorties in 2 days during Operation Cobra. Another caught his instrument panel. He couldn't contact the base. Fuel gauge, unreliable. Confirmation of 2 destroyed tanks below him. He flew back to England on dead reckoning. When he reached the coast, he had roughly 5 minutes of fuel left. Didn't matter, it was his own base. He flew another mission that afternoon. By July 28th, it was clear to German high command that the armor push had failed. The air superiority was too complete. Time equals 600 milliseconds greater than. But by then, the Americans had broken through the lines. Open ground lay ahead. The Typhoons had done that. What's remarkable is that this wasn't a one-moment victory. From July through September 1944, Typhoon squadrons continued the tank hunting mission across France. Every withdrawal meant rearguard actions, and every defended position meant Typhoons were called in. They learned which angles of attack worked best against different tank types. They found that hitting a track could immobilize a tank even if the penetrating power wasn't there. They became essentially mobile. Artillery. These numbers were verified by ground spotters and reconnaissance photos. In combat, it's hard to track what actually happened. The Germans started referring to the Typhoon as Jabos, a contraction of Jagbomber, fighter bomber. This wasn't propaganda. They'd scatter vehicles. They'd request fighter cover that never came because the Luftwaffe was fighting for its life elsewhere. The fighters come down like hawks. We sit in our steel boxes and pray. The Typhoons hadn't just killed tanks. By autumn 1944, as Germany faced the prospect of a two-front war with the Soviets advancing from the east, the loss of the tactical air advantage in the west was catastrophic. Every movement invited air attack. Immense pressure on German commanders to conduct warfare in dense urban areas or deep forests where aircraft couldn't operate effectively, not immediately. But they were fighting defensively on ground not of their choosing with less and less mobility. But here's what the history books don't always emphasize. The cost was personal, flak, mechanical failure, operational accidents, enemy fighters. Not all of them died. Some ejected and made it back. That's a 15 to 20% loss rate over 4 months. In any other profession, that would be considered catastrophic. Squadron leader Neville Duke, the pilot who'd led that first attack on June 7, was eventually rotated home after flying 150 plus combat missions, but many of his friends hadn't. He ejected, was captured, and spent the rest of the war in a German POW camp. He'd survived German flak, a parachute landing, enemy occupation, and injury. That's the tragedy of war that doesn't make it into headlines. They flew anyway. They'd go back to civilian life, become farmers, accountants, teachers. The weight of the choices made it 50 feet above ground level. One Typhoon pilot, Flight Lieutenant Robert Walsh, became a school teacher after the war. He never talked about flying, but in his personal papers, found after his death in 1998, was a list, annotated with dates, locations, sometimes last known thoughts. That's what the Typhoon campaign cost, not just tanks destroyed. Grief. So what changed? The Typhoon proved that dedicated anti-armor aviation was viable. Before 1944, many commanders believed that tanks could only be reliably stopped by other tanks. The Typhoons changed that calculus. This had ripple effects. Tactics adapted. From Typhoon operations, every modern air force built dedicated close air support aircraft. The Soviets had the Ilyushin 1L2, but the Typhoon pioneered the role. The A-1 Skyraider and A-4 Skyhawk were operating in that exact role. The A-10 Warthog, literally designed to kill tanks from low altitude, was carrying on the tradition established in 1944. Every modern Air Force has close air support doctrine. It all traces back to those Typhoon pilots in Normandy. Most of them are gone now, but their legacy lives on. Not all tanks. Trucks, half-tracks, self-propelled guns, everything. That mattered enormously. The Typhoon pilots weren't superhuman. They were scared. Some of them were killed in accidents that shouldn't have happened. Some of them were paralyzed by fear but flew anyway. It was that they were afraid and they kept flying. Bravery is acknowledging that fear and pressing the trigger anyway. Sailors, infantrymen, engineers, medics, logistics personnel. But they were a critical part. They proved that air power could be precise, flexible, and deadly. If you found this story compelling, if it moved you, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel. We're uploading new videos every week. Comments, tell us, what would you do at 50 feet above ground with anti-aircraft fire coming at you? I'll be reading every comment. The gunner who shot down a tank with a handgun. A story so insane we had to verify it 3 times. Thanks for watching, and remember, history isn't just in textbooks. It's in the choices of ordinary people doing extraordinary things.